Hi, everyone. I know we'll probably end up going right to the very last second tonight, so I wanted to jump in ahead of time and just give some thanks to some very special people. Two people that actually made this happen, and they're sort of our unsung heroes, are Betsy DeLuca and Michelle. Sorry, Michelle, your last name has just gone out of my head. But they worked with David when we were going to do it live when they were the CE coordinators. And so I really want to thank them for all the legwork they did ahead of time to make this happen, because it made it really easy for us to just segue into the webinar way of doing things. And I have to say that these 5 evenings have just gone by so quickly. I can't believe that we're on our 5th evening. I also want to thank Wendy for keeping everything organized and making sure that everything went out on time. And Jeffrey, you have made things so easy for us. It's just nice to be able to enjoy this and not have to worry about recording and all of the rest of it. It's just been wonderful to have you. And most of all, I just want to thank David. You've really taken us on a journey these 5 evenings, and I am so grateful for your wisdom and just your humbleness as well. You have so much to give, and yet you're just very genuine and humble. And so I just want to thank you very much for everything that you've shared with us over the last 4 evenings, and that you will be sharing with us tonight. So that's basically all I wanted to say, was thank you to all of those people for making this happen. And I know that everybody is enjoying this very much. So thank you very much, David, and I'll turn it over to you. Enjoy tonight. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Colleen. Welcome back to everybody. All right, it is our final class. It's amazing how quickly things go, and it's always sad when we get to this point. And I just want to reiterate, thank you, Colleen, for everything that you've done. And thank you, Jeffrey, for everything you've done with this. And thank you to all of you for your interest in this, because if it wasn't for your interest, we wouldn't be here. So we have some questions that have come in, and I did send a email earlier in the day. I was just curious if anybody had any particular topics that they wanted to cover, and some people did respond. And it turned out that almost everybody wanted the same thing, and that was what I had planned for tonight. So I guess we're all thinking along the same lines. And the bigger topic for tonight is the agricultural and sustainability side of things. But there's also several other points, because I really wanted to tell you stories about some of the distillers and who these people are and what they're doing. And that's closely connected to the sustainability side, because small scale artisanal boutique distillation of oils is frequently the best way to promote sustainability. I mean, that's kind of a general rule for all kinds of things, that if people are doing things on a small scale and it's connected to their local environment and taking care of their environment, that it tends to be more sustainable in general. So that was nice to hear that everybody wanted to spend some time talking about that. And there were a couple of specific questions that came in. And so since now we are in the last class, of course, everybody's asking the questions, and that's good. You feel free to ask anywhere along the line. I will go ahead and take a few minutes here at the beginning and talk about some of the things that have come in. But I do have a fairly extensive presentation that we should delve into to answer some of your questions, actually. And one thing that I wanted to address right at the beginning. First question that I wanted to cover here, and it's a really, really big subject. I mean, we could have a whole program just on this one question, and that is, my question and interest is essential oils and cancer. What oils can help and why and how? There is a lot of anxiety that goes with this disease, and anxiety helps cancer grow, and that is correct. And I'll just mention that there's a lot of anxiety around all disease, and anxiety worsens all conditions. But it's true that link with aromatherapy is really the relaxation part. That's the main thing. So we don't use essential oils for treating cancer. And there is quite a bit of misleading information about this. Some of the multi-level marketing companies have sort of indirectly promoted this misinformation that certain oils can cure cancer. And a lot of it is because there is a confusion about in vitro versus in vivo. So what has happened is that certain research has been done looking into the effects of certain essential oils on standardized cell lines, cancer cell lines. And one of the most obvious examples of this is the research into frankincense oil. And the research into frankincense oil has been done in petri dishes. That means in vitro. And various cancer cell lines were tested in petri dishes, basically against frankincense oil. And it was found that frankincense oil could kill the cancer at certain concentrations. Now, the results of that it means nothing, basically, other than you can kill some standardized cancer cell lines in a petri dish. It does not mean that you can use frankincense oil for these various types of cancers. And that's where the misrepresentation, the misinformation, the fraudulent sort of implications of this happen. And so what has happened is that this kind of urban legend has come out that frankincense will cure cancer. And it's been widely promoted. Now, I would say that if there was an essential oil that could cure cancer, that would probably be frankincense oil. And if it was going to cure a cancer, it would probably be skin cancer. But there's all kinds of cancers, and there's all kinds of uses of frankincense oil with cancer patients, because it can be very calming in aromatherapy, and it can also be very soothing for the skin, anti-inflammatory. It can be applied, for example, on lymphedema of breast cancer. But there's no real basis to the idea that it will cure cancer. Now, this is obviously a very complicated subject. There are a lot of claims that are made about essential oils. And there have been some documentation of people who have come out and said, well, I used this and it cured the cancer. Now, I think that without judging that, I would say there's a possibility of that. But what the issue is can that be replicated or not in any other person? You see, because if it was known and established that using frankincense oil in a particular way could cure certain types of cancers, it would be applied. It would be widely used. And the reason for that is because any method that has the potential of being a cure is going to be adopted widely. Okay? And it's not going to come from the field of natural medicine making these claims. It's going to come through science, and it's going to come through real rigorous testing and confirmation. And if they could actually figure out the combinations of the compounds and how to do it and how to administer it at what levels for what length of time to actually kill the cancer without killing the patient, which is the problem. The thing that would make it happen would not be people selling essential oils. It would be the investors in Wall Street. Okay, the stock market is what would make it happen. So these things get passed around, and they're not reliable in terms of anything that we can say, okay, I can do this. This is not a cure that anybody can apply with expectations. Now, the reason that the results of in vitro cannot be replicated in the body is very simple. It's just that the dosage that's applied against these cancer cells in a petri dish is extremely high, and they're in direct contact with the oil. Now, you can't do that in the body. You would have to have an IV of frankincense oil going into your bloodstream to get the levels to comparable potency to kill the cancer cells. And of course, that would kill you before it could do the damage to the cells. So that's the real problem. And that's where the misunderstanding comes in terms of the marketing. And that's misleading. Now, the allopathic community has a big issue with that. And the big issue that they have is not so much that these various things are not helpful. It's that people will have unrealistic expectations and will not get the allopathic treatment that they need. Well, of course, a lot of people have already walked away from allopathic treatments. It's already failed them. That's why they're trying these things. And they do find quality of life is better and the quantity of life is better in general if you are at least using natural medicine to complement the allopathic treatment. Now, to your question specifically, well, what can we do then? We don't treat cancer. We manage the cancer case, and we help the patient. That's what we do. And aromatherapy has a lot of documented evidence showing that it's very good for relaxation. And relaxation is a primary therapy for all conditions. It's immune boosting and it's pain relieving and so forth. And so aromatherapy does have a big role in complementary treatment for cancer. And I know that there are already a number of practitioners and clinics and projects coming out more and more. I know of at least one initiative that's trying to move out at a global level, working with insurance companies to offer complementary holistic treatment through a chain of cancer clinics, basically. And it's coming, and the research is there showing that aromatherapy as an adjunct modality can be very helpful. But it's not treating the cancer. Okay, that's the main difference. It's supporting the patient. So aromatherapy has the role of patient support. And what it's best at doing is relaxation. Now, there are some specific things that can be done and have been done at a more medical level. For example, dilute a very low concentration of tea tree dilution in water has been found to be very effective for washing cancerous tumors that are on the outside of the body. And the research was done quite a while back, maybe 20 years ago or something. And what they were looking for, they wanted to find the solution for necrotic tissue of cancer, okay? Because necrotic tumors smell really bad, and it really affects the quality of life for the patient and the caregivers. And they found that doing a dilute wash with tea tree on the tumor actually first had an immediate effect of reducing the fetid smell, the putrefaction aroma. But then they were really surprised because it actually healed the skin. over the tumor, and it reduced a lot of the pain. It didn't cure the cancer. It just improved the quality of life. So there are some things that can be done at a more medical level. That was done in a hospital setting. And many of these things that are coming out are actually being researched in a hospital setting. So that's the short answer, which wasn't all that short actually. But the use of essential oils and aromatherapy and massage for cancer patients is becoming fairly well known. There's actually some people who are teaching specialized techniques and specialized applications of oils. And again, in my experience, it's not so much like you use this oil. You use the oil that the patient finds the most enjoyable and relaxing. So there's no real standard approach yet. I'm sure that in the controlled studies, they used like one oil and it was probably lavender or something like that. But in terms of just helping people, caregivers, family members can use a diffuser. They can do gentle massage. Obviously you don't do any massage over a tumor. You don't do anything that's going to move any cancer cells around, but very gentle kind of massage with aromatherapy is definitely very helpful. So good question, big topic. Sorry, I can't go into more, but it's something that, let me just put it out there to the organization, that would be a specialized class that maybe somebody would like to do at some point. All right, another series of questions came in about frankincense. And one person reported that they put frankincense tears into a candle and it burst into flame. And that's what they will do because it's a resin, they'll burn. So don't do that. The way that you would like to do it, actually, let me show you. You would like to have a incense burner. This is a traditional Japanese incense burner, but any kind of heat resistant container is good. And then this has the white ash that comes from rice hulls. And this is a traditional incense material that holds it. And if you can see, there's a little circle there that's at the bottom, and I'll show you what that circle is, or was. That circle was one of these self-igniting charcoals. Now there's two types of charcoal that you can use. The self-igniting type has gunpowder in it, so if you light it, make sure you have it outside because it will spark and it will put out some toxic smoke. Now, depending on where you are, you have to be really careful about that. It's not going to start any fires or anything because it's going to just be right around the coal. But still, if you're going to use incense in this particular way, be careful because you can burn a hole in your carpet relatively quickly, or like this person found out, suddenly the candle had a 4-foot flame. No, I'm sorry, 4 inches. Really making it sound dramatic, but still, that's enough to maybe set your altar on fire. So you just light this and do it outside so you get some ventilation. And then what will happen is it will start to glow, and then you can put it into your incense burner like that. And then what you can do is you take your frankincense and okay, so well, this is actually enough to fumigate the whole Vatican. You don't need to use that much. You can do it with a very, very small amount because frankincense actually, a tiny piece goes a long way. And so here's a much smaller piece here. And so really all you need is about this much. And you just drop that on the coal. That's all. And then if you have other ritualistic ceremonial things that you would like to do, maybe have a fan, some feathers, things like that, you can do that. But this piece will burn for 15 minutes, okay? And it will fumigate the entire house. The other concern besides burning a hole in your carpet by dropping pieces of it that are lit, is this smoke detector. And especially in public places, when we used to do this, we would always be very careful because some smoke detectors and fire alarms are set up with sprinklers. And of course, that's a huge inconvenience if you've got 300 people there. It never happened, but we always had to double check. And so that's how you do it, okay? And don't put it in a candle. That's the takeaway point here. Don't put it in a candle. It's a resin, it'll burn. Second question that came about frankincense is how to classify it according to the 5 elements. And specifically, why isn't frankincense classified in the 5-element system as fire? Well, as you'll remember, when I gave the talk about putting essential oils into different classifications, one of the things that I pointed out is that some oils are really clearly related to this element or that element. Eucalyptus oil smells very light. It evaporates very quickly. It's a top note. It is used historically primarily for the lungs. It opens the lungs. It has an oxygenating effect. And therefore we can say there's a clear series of parallels and associations, correspondences with the air element, okay? Vetiver oil, distilled from roots, the oil is thick and heavy. It has a calming, grounding kind of effect. It's viscous and sticky, smells like dirt, okay? And so therefore we can say that oil has clear correlations with earth element. Now, frankincense, there are no such clear correlations. The only correlation that we can actually make with frankincense and the fire element is that it comes from an extremely hot climate, okay? But that doesn't mean that the oil is thermogenic by nature, because frankincense actually is anti-inflammatory. Now, the oil itself, applied directly, undiluted on the skin, can be irritant, but that's not enough because all essential oils have that potential. So all essential oils have the potential to have some fire energy reaction. And that's what we're looking for. And therefore, when we say, all right, how do we classify the oils that go in the fire element? We look for things that are really clear, all right? So cinnamon oil, oregano oil, these things are spices. They're strongly heating, and you put them on the skin, they will burn. They'll create contact dermatitis. So that's how we can use these systems with some clarity. And we want to stay away from trying to make these correspondences if they're not really obvious, that's all. Because otherwise it can turn into this kind of circular, esoteric Chinese medical logic, right? Where everything correlates with everything else. And the Chinese really love to do that. And Chinese medicine is full of all that kind of stuff, but it can also get to be fairly ridiculous, you know, like saying, oh, the patient walked in wearing a red shirt, therefore they must have a fire imbalance. So we have to be careful with those kind of things. And finally, the last part was that there's a this person expressing concern about the frankincense trees, and thank you for that concern, and also a link to a person who has a place in Arizona that is cultivating frankincense trees, and this is something that I've seen this link also. Actually, it was misspelled. It's not coming up. But let's see if I can fix this right now. So I can just put this in the chat. If I can get this to work right here without taking up more than about 15 seconds, then I can give you this link that was posted by the student. No, it's not coming up. So I'll have to send that over as a follow-up. But anyway, this person cultivates boswellia, the frankincense trees. And the question is, do I know of any work done in the Baja area for frankincense cultivation? And no, I do not, but that's where it would be done. I know of the work that's being done in the frankincense regions of Oman and Saudi Arabia and Somalia and Somaliland. That's where our sources are based. All right, now here we are. So many questions are coming in, and I think that it's good. I'm afraid that some of these questions, this, my first impression here is that this could take all of class. What plants would you recommend to use and in what ways to increase overall consciousness? Are you able to share some of your personal experience in this regard? Well, overall consciousness, you know, the way that my mind works is I would say, well, what is overall consciousness and how do we increase it? Do we mean support cognitive functions? And do we mean protect cognitive functions from decline? Do we mean enhance concentration, enhance recall, induce mystical experiences, create transcendent states of meditation? I mean, it means kind of a lot of things. And I would be hesitant to say, well, essential oils can do that, or anything can do that. I mean, the only thing that I know that can really do that, unmistakably, are the entheogens, the entheogenic plants. So if you wake up in the morning and you have a big bowl of ayahuasca, that will definitely do something to your consciousness. But I don't think you're asking about that. You are asking, well, no, you are. What plants would you recommend? Okay, well, that's what I can say is the main thing that people do for really expanding consciousness, increasing overall consciousness. But then the question comes, do you really want to do that? There's a reason why our brain functions neurologically at only 6% during waking consciousness, and that is because if it starts to function at 20 or 30% suddenly without preparation, or even higher, which is what happens under the influence of entheogens, okay, or psychedelic drugs as they used to be called, then it makes it very difficult to drive and things like that. We start losing our sense of self, and we start, you know, merging with the mythological dimensions of the cosmos and all of that. That's the only classification of plants that I know that will do this with predictable kinds of effects. And these are plants that should be used in a traditional cultural setting, with in a ceremonial setting within a traditional culture is the best way to do it. All right. Because these plants are connected to mythology, they're connected to the archetypes that they wake up in our subconscious. And if we're in a safe container for that kind of consciousness expansion, then it can be a powerfully positive transformative effect. But I know that this is being abused also, and things that should be done in the Amazon under the guidance of an elder ayahuasquero who's been doing it his whole life in a small group, not some ayahuasca resort that you found on TripAdvisor, then you can have a genuine experience, and it's safe and it's healing. But I also know that people are having bad experiences because they're in this retreat with 100 people and everybody's having their issues coming up, or they're doing it at a yoga studio in Manhattan and on a Saturday night, these kind of things. So taken out of context, those things can be very disturbing for people, and people have pretty shocking experiences. So it's a sensitive thing, but that's really the only classification of plants, a category of plants. And that includes peyote in the Native American church, and it includes psilocybin. And psilocybin now is getting a lot more attention in clinical settings, because it's being found that higher doses can really help people have a transcendent experience that allows them to get past fear of death. And so it's being used for late stage cancer. And also microdosing is being found to be quite effective for some people for antidepressant purposes and things. So that's a quick answer. Now, in terms of aromatherapy and essential oils, what I can say is that there is the category of the sacred scents: agarwood, sandalwood, palo santo, frankincense, and used in conjunction with our meditation practice, they definitely help to enhance and deepen the meditative states. And this is something that we don't have to be too concerned about being incapacitated by it. And we don't have to be too concerned about, days of re-entry back into society after leaving ordinary reality. It helps us to maintain more mental stability, emotional stability overall. And so those would be my top choices for supporting meditation practice overall. All right, here's another one. You mentioned lotus essential oil a couple of meetings before. Could you please recommend where I can buy some real lotus essential oil? Well, that's a really good question, because it's extremely rare. And whenever something is really rare, then it's produced in very small quantities, and it's really hard to find the real thing, and it tends to come and go also. So I think what I can do with that is, I know one distiller that a few years back, he actually set out to do a project, because there's different kinds of lotuses, and they are extracted in India as perfume ingredients, but they are generally extracted with solvents, and so you don't want to be eating them. They're made into perfume ingredients primarily, which is okay to breathe the fragrance of these kind of extracts. But it's the kind of quest that, people who are really, really looking for the real thing, they can go to great lengths to find like a real lotus oil. And there's all different species of lotuses, okay? And the true blue lotus is actually very rarely found. And it's a specific species. It's not what you're going to see in my slideshow, which is a lavender colored water lily, and that's called blue lotus. But the blue lotus is really something different. Now, blue lotus actually, okay, so this goes back to the question about the entheogens. Blue lotus is one of the ones that's being talked about a lot on sort of these entheogenic websites. You can get the stamens of the blue lotus. Now, I'm not sure if it's the true blue lotus or its cousin, but it's being promoted as something that if you drink a tea of it before bed, it'll give you lucid dreams and things like that. So there is some basis for that. You might want to check that out. But otherwise, let's see, I can maybe send Colleen the link or the email to the distiller that I was telling you about. And he actually went and found and identified the true blue lotus of mythology that actually had the psychoactive properties, and he did distill some. And apparently it was just like this famous event in certain small circles of aromatherapy where he had this minute amount of this blue lotus essential oil and everybody was raving about it. So it happens, but it's kind of like connoisseur grade. And otherwise I can't really give any recommendations. Okay, we should wrap this up because there's so many things to tell you other than what I'm telling you. So are there beneficial ways to treat chronic Lyme disease symptoms with herbs and essential oils on a long-term basis? Some symptoms, such as fatigue and memory loss and decrease in mental clarity, as well as inflammatory gut symptoms. Well, again, this would be something that we could start to scratch the surface on if we have a 2-week full-time course? Okay. The answer is yes, there are beneficial ways to treat chronic Lyme disease. And I am working with a number of patients, and I am finding that I have some differences of opinion about chronic Lyme than a lot of people in the general community. And I'm finding that some different approaches are producing some better results in some cases. And my main difference is that with chronic Lyme, the main issue that seems to be happening is that people are just taking antibiotics way too long. I mean, some people are taking antibiotics like for 5 years. And then if they're not doing that, they're taking these really strong antimicrobial herbs for years and years, or they're doing both. And my thinking on this is that this is just way too long, that if you're not getting rid of the microbe with all of that, that you might as well try something else. Try to boost the system so that you have more of a chance of peaceful coexistence. And so that's the kind of approach that I'm taking with people who have been doing chronic Lyme treatment. And I'm well familiar with the kind of herbs that are being used and the kind of treatments and the diagnoses that are being used. And people tend to come to me after they've already done a lot of this kind of stuff and it isn't working. And so I just say, well, why don't you try something different? And the primary difference is I say, try nourishing instead of attacking. Okay, try building yourself up instead of trying to use all the antimicrobials. Because in order to use the antimicrobial effect, you're going to have to take the antibiotics and the antimalarials and antiprotozoans and this and this. It just goes on, right? And the same with the herbs. So that's something that is a completely different topic, but yes, I'm aware, and the answer is yes, there's lots that can be done. Okay, so some clarification has come up here, and frankincense cultivator in the New World. The website is jason-esmalea.com. Okay, so thank you for posting that. That is there in the chat for everybody, and that's the person who is doing the frankincense cultivation a nursery in Phoenix, Arizona, I believe he's there. And then also John Steele. Thank you, Colleen. John Steele is the man who I heard about the Blue Lotus from, but the distiller is Jack Chapman. Okay, and some of you may know Jack. He's in Hawaii, and he is, we could say he's a true alchemist. He's spent his whole life on this quest to get the highest quality distillation from plants, and his techniques and his equipment is really state of the art. And he did the distillation, but Jack and John Steele are very close friends. So I heard about the famed Blue Lotus oil that Jack had distilled from John Steele. And you might be able, if you know John or Jack, you might be able to get a little bit of it. Or maybe Jack is doing a whole bunch more now. I don't really know. I'm not in touch with that community. But those are the people. Yes. Okay, now, merging cannabis flowers and essential oil seems to be a hot topic at the moment, especially in Canada. Well, yes, and here in the US also. Do you have any cosmological cannabis thoughts or traditional aromatic cannabis teachings you may have come across that you want to share? Well, not at the moment. Maybe if I had some, I would have some cosmological thoughts. That's one of the somewhat predictable effects that I found back when I was experimenting with cannabis, is that it would stimulate thoughts that had that seemed to have great profundity at the time. Let's see, and the name is Chapman. Okay, so it's Jack Chapman here for everybody. I think this is how it's spelled, and it's been years and years since I had contact with him. I did find his website, and oh, I know what it is. Okay, here, I can put you directly in touch. Okay, so we have solved the Blue Lotus Mystery. Let me just double check. Aha. Okay, he's got pictures of Blue Lotus and distillations. Oh, he calls himself the pirate distiller now. I like that. Let's see. No, he's got lots of wonderful things. A black copal. Let's see if he's got a lotus. Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to keep this from you. No, there's no lotus happening that I see, but lots and lots of really interesting things. Okay. And Jack Chapman's website is here in the chat. Here it is, senseofknowing.com. And so we found the Blue Lotus, and you can talk to Jack directly now. And I'm sure that if he had some benefactors who wanted to sponsor a special distillation, that he would do it. All right, now let's talk about the cannabis. Okay, now there's a couple of things to say about this mixing of essential oils. I actually had an interesting, somewhat disturbing conversation with a young man about a year ago, maybe. And he contacted me with a business proposal. He was creating these scented mixtures to go into vaporizers. And I guess that's kind of the way that a lot of essential oils now are being mixed with cannabis. As a scent is a flavored vaporize, vaping cannabis. And he wanted my opinion on several of the formulas that he was putting together. And so I said, sure, I'll look them over. And he sent me these formulas. And I responded and I said, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, it's hard enough on your lungs to smoke cannabis, but if you start smoking essential oils, it's really dangerous. And then in addition to that, several of these ingredients you're not going to be able to find in their pure form. You're going to have to settle for synthetic flavoring agents. And so therefore, if you use these, you're basically poisoning people. I never heard back from him, but at least I gave him something to think about. So that's the main concern that I have, is from my limited experience with it, is that whenever we're ingesting essential oils into the respiratory system, it can be really pretty damaging. All right. So otherwise, another really big topic to talk about cannabis at some point, and all of the research that's coming out. I will say that it's a very wonderful herb that's helping a lot of people, and especially when it's used correctly in the right proportions. There's ratios that are being discovered now between the CBD and the THC to get maximum pain relief in certain kinds of cancers and maximum anti-inflammatory powers and all these kind of things. So it's a lot more sophisticated than it was even a couple of years ago. And at the same time, it's also emerging that cannabis, especially at the concentration levels that we have now, is surprisingly addictive for a lot of people. And a lot of people are in denial about that. And they think that it's totally benign and everything's okay. But actually, cannabis addiction is really growing. Now, is it as harmful overall as alcohol? I would say no, in terms of its sociological damaging effects, but it's still a narcotic. I mean, the plant is in the category of a narcotic, and that's why we have to be careful with it. It's like all plants. If we use them right, they will help us, and if we use them wrong, we can hurt ourselves with it. So that's, I think that's the last of the questions. And so thank you. Okay, we had a true question and answer session tonight. And now let's go ahead and jump into our presentation. Now, what I wanted to do is to just take you on some of my travels around the world over the years, with special thought to the people that are distilling the oils. So I wanted to introduce you to some distillers. And along the way, tell you about the sustainability, the ecological, the agricultural side of things, and also some things about, you know, the lifestyle and the industry and all these kind of things. So this is a, if we can get through all of this, I don't know, these are pretty extensive slideshows, but I will go fairly quickly. And so the first one is from India. I'm going to go ahead and put us on a screen share here. So these are travels that I have made at various stages of life. And I have not done any extensive traveling now for a few years, maybe I would say 3 years ago was probably the last extensive journey. But I traveled extensively for over 20 years and in different phases. I went to Nepal 6 times. I spent a total of 2 years there. And I went to India 6 times and spent a total of probably 6 months there. So India, Nepal, 12 trips. That's a lot of jet lag. And also real parasites. So I became an expert in parasitology as a result of my studies of Ayurveda in India and Nepal. And I also learned quite a lot, especially in the travels to India, about aromatics. Now, my studies in Nepal were with a Tibetan doctor, primarily, but also Ayurvedic doctors. And that was the first 6 journeys that I made. And when I went to India, those journeys were specifically to study essential oils and aromatherapy, actually. And I ended up taking people on tours the last 3 of those trips. The first 3, I traveled around with a gentleman who was acting as my fragrance mentor. And I'll give you the whole chronology here, the whole lineage of teachers. So my mentor in India was Ramakant Harlalka, and he is a chemist and a distiller. And I met him through Christopher McMahon, who used to have an aromatic essential oil company called White Lotus Aromatics. He has since retired, gone offline, but I know Christopher, not well, haven't had any communication with him for many years, but I knew him. He introduced me to a lot of aspects of aromatherapy 30 years ago. It was a long time ago. And through him, I met Ramakant and made those journeys. And it was also through Ramakant that I met Jack Chapman, I believe, is how it all happened. So this is just one aspect of the world of aromatherapy, is that you can make these networks of friends and associates. So this is about the travels to India first. And this is what is commonly called a blue lotus, but it is not. It is actually a sort of lavender or fuchsia colored water lily. And so the it still smells beautiful, and it is extracted and it's used as a perfume ingredient. But the true blue lotus is the mystery flower. Apparently it was used by the pharaohs, and they had some kind of drink they made from it that was entheogenic, that allowed them to have some kind of divine experience. But this is a water lily, and I just put this at the beginning because it's a nice symbol of India. You see these in the ponds everywhere. And so we'll start here, and let's see. Just want to make sure that this is, okay, we'll start. I thought I had it in different sequence, but it doesn't matter. We'll start in the flower market in Mumbai. And these are all photos that I've taken. And these were taken quite a while ago. I think this is over 10 years ago since I was there. But the thing that's remarkable about the flower market of Mumbai is that it's huge, and it has all of these flowers, and you can imagine how lovely it smells. And you will find these flower markets all over India. They're not just in the big cities, they are in every town, basically. Every town in India has a flower market. And it is quite remarkable because these flower markets, if you look at the entire network, and this is a pink lotus here on the right-hand side. Actually, both of them are pink lotuses there. Different types, let's see, pink and something else on the left, I'm not sure, but the big one, that's open here, that's a pink lotus. Now, if you look at the entire network of how this works agriculturally and socioeconomically, it's quite remarkable, because in India, flowers are a huge industry and they support farmers. Flower cultivation is actually the highest paying cash crop. Cultivation of flowers pays a lot more than vegetables for the most part. And so farmers will always have some kind of flower crop that they're adding in, or a lot of people specialize. And millions of farmers are supported by growing flowers. And millions of people are supported by transporting flowers. And millions of people are supported in the markets by selling flowers. It's a gigantic industry. And what is its function? It has one function, and that is to make offerings to the gods and goddesses in the altars and the temples, all right? Or festivities, garlands, weddings, things like that. So this is indoors. And here's garlands. And this is really, in my mind, this is a really nice industry because it's ecological, it's non-toxic, it's sustainable, it's been going on for centuries and centuries, and it has no purpose whatsoever except beauty and appreciation of nature, joy, celebration, ceremonies and offerings. It's very healthy. So that was one of the things that I was introduced to there. And I actually spent quite a bit of time in other towns going to flower markets. It's incredibly busy and loud and everybody's haggling. But what happens is that family members come to the market and buy up the flowers that they're going to use in their ceremonial offerings for the week. And that's basically the role of a grandmother in the typical Hindu home, is to do the pujas in the morning, to ring the bell and light the incense and say the prayers and the mantras at the family altar. And then that includes making the flower offerings. So now we'll take a little trip to meet a special rose. And this is the Rosa bourbonica. And this Rosa bourbonica grows in Rajasthan. And there's a very nice ecological story about this, and a unique perfume story that I will tell you also. So this is where we are going. And this is just north of Lake Pushkar. And you may know, if you have been to Rajasthan, that this is where the Camel Festival happens every year. And this is a unique farm. It's not so unique now, but it was extremely unique when I was there because it was just beginning to start a trend in this region of the cultivation of roses for a major cash crop. Now, if you look at that mountaintop, there's a temple, okay? And there are 2 temples on either side of the lake. And those temples are the abodes of Brahma's 2 wives. They live in separate houses. And this one is the home of Savitri. And Savitri is the radiance of the sun. So this has a beautiful story because when Ramakant took me here, we were going to meet this farmer who was starting this agricultural revolution. And he was starting it with roses. And so Ramakant, when we got to this farm, he said, well, there's the temple of Savitri. And now this entire valley is being planted with roses. And the way that he summed it up was, he said, Savitri is calling the roses to this particular region, which I thought was beautiful. So here's what is unique about this. You can see that 17 varieties of mango and all of these different rows of roses that are planted here, and vegetables and many, many other things. The gentleman on the left here, Babu Lal, is the man who started this particular approach. Now, this is now established in this region, but when I met him, this was just starting, and he was doing something very unique because a lot of the farmers in that region, they had all fallen into this trap of growing hybridized wheat based on big agribusiness interests. And it was depleting the water, and it was poisoning the soil with pesticides and all of that. And the crops were going down, and many farmers were suffering from poverty as a result. And so what Babulal did was he took his 40 acres and he said, I'm going to create this integrated model of all kinds of things. I'm not just going to grow wheat, I'm going to grow all kinds of things. And so he planted the roses, and you can see in the back there, mangoes, okay? And you can see in the middle here, a very unique bird sitting on a rose. But medicinal trees, these are mango flowers, by the way, on this tree back here. And so what he was doing was he was actually creating a 40 acres of very intensely cultivated biodiversity. And his main crop, his main cash crop was roses that made the most money. And what he did with this was he distilled the rose oil, and he distilled the rose hydrosol, and he also distilled rose attar, and he also made gulkand from the roses, which is a classical Ayurvedic rose petal jam. And I'm sorry I don't have any pictures of that being made, but basically they take the rose petals and they mash it up with jaggery, sugarcane juice. And it's a cooling, nutritious kind of Ayurvedic food and medicine. So what's unique about this is that the roses are the centerpiece of ecological restoration. And what was happening when I was there, Babulal had just finished sponsoring a week-long puja in town, making lots of offerings of gratitude for the prosperity that was coming, because his farm was substantially more prosperous than his neighbors. And when he first started doing this, of course, his neighbors thought he was crazy that he was doing all that. But now, you know, he's producing fruits, and he's producing vegetables, and he's producing medicines. And here's one of the medicines. This is the amla tree. Here's the amla fruit. This is one of the ingredients of Triphala that you might have heard about. It's a famous Ayurvedic medicine with many, many uses. And this fruit, amla, the word amla means sour, and it's extremely sour. And that's because it's one of the highest natural sources of vitamin C. So this is a very important rejuvenative medicine in Ayurveda. So that is a example of how an aromatic crop is really the foundation of sustainability. Now, he was also doing distillation of attars, A-T-T-A-R, attar, which is an Arabic word. It means several things. It means perfume. It means the physician who works with aromatic medicines. Basically, it's a distillation of flowers like rose attar into a base of sandalwood oil. And the sandalwood oil is washed with the rose hydrosol repeatedly. It's a classic traditional botanical perfume preparation method that is unfortunately dying out because it's so labor intensive. It takes a month of repeated distillations to make it. It takes the sandalwood oil, which is increasingly rare. It takes tons and tons of flowers or roots or whatever you're making the attar with. And now everything is just made with synthetics. And the easiest way to tell that your attar is synthetic is that you can't get rid of it. It just stays on. And here is a gentleman making a modern contemporary attar. And I thought about including the whole process of making attars, but that would take quite a bit of time. So we did questions instead. Now, I did want to tell you a very interesting story about a unique innovation in the extraction of the Rosa bourbonica. So when Ramakant and I got to this farm, one of the first things that he showed me was the distillation of rose or the cooking of rose hydrosol. But it was not being done in the typical way of distillation, where you put the roses in the still and you pass the steam through it and the steam rises out and condenses back into the hydrosol with the essential oil content in it. This was a method that Ramakant had developed. It was a different way of extracting rose oil, and it was quite remarkable. And I made a perfume out of it. But the way that it was done was that these degs, okay, I'll go back here. These copper pots are called degs. One of these pots would be filled with the freshly harvested, freshly plucked rose petals from the farm, and then covered with the spring water that was bubbling up on this farm. That was lovely. And then it was simmered slowly, kind of a low heat. And what it would do is it would create a rosewater soup that was very thick with oil. It was not distilled and condensed. It was just rose soup, rose tea, okay? Now, Ramakant, being a chemist, came up with this idea of membrane filtration technology, where he had what he did was he took a tube and he filled it with silica crystals. And the first thing that he showed, well, let me back up. So the first thing he did when we got there was we went to one of these degs and he opened it up and he dipped a little cup into it and he said, here, drink this. And it was this really strong rose tea, basically. Then he explained the whole process of how they get the oil. So what they do is they take this rose tea and they pour it through this tube that is full of silica crystals. And the oil sticks to the crystals and the water part comes out the bottom. So it's like pouring it through, like filtering water through sand, basically, but it's filtering rose tea through silica. And then what is done is that it has separated the water from the oil, and the oil is now stuck on the crystals, all right? So it's crystal separated oil, rose oil. Then what was done was that food grade alcohol was poured over the tube again, through the tube. And the alcohol would act as a solvent that would carry away the rose oil out the bottom. And so then that was gathered. And then what you had was rose oil tincture. Okay, you had an crystal filtered rose tea that had been separated, and now it was in alcohol. The rose oil was now in alcohol. And then after that, they would put that into a rotary evaporator, which is basically very low heat that would slowly evaporate out the alcohol, leaving behind the pure rose oil. And so it was never subjected to high heat, like in a typical kind of distillation or pressure sometimes. And it was a unique species, the Rosa bourbonica. And this rose oil was absolutely unbelievable. And it's not being produced anymore. They will do it on a custom basis. If I want to give them, you know, $15,000 to make me a liter of it, they'll still do it. But I turned all of this into a story, and stories are a great place to start from making a perfume. And so I made a perfume, and I learned the perfume from Ramakant, actually. And I'll tell you the story of the perfume. That's the story of Rajasthan. And the story goes that, you know, I flew to Mumbai and I was totally jet lagged, and Ramakant picked me up, and we went to the train station. And because I was so jet lagged, the train station is sort of hallucinogenic enough as it is, but I was really exhausted, and it's crowded and dirty, and you know, I had great fear of losing him, because if he disappeared, I'd be really lost. And he got us onto a car, and we had a couple of bunks. He was on the lower, I was on the upper. And like many Indian train trips, it turns out that everybody's related to everybody else. And so Ramakant ended up meeting all these relatives, and he always carries a bag of these aromatic things. And so he's walking around spraying people with hydrosols and giving them perfumes, things like that. And it was a very aromatic journey, but I was exhausted. So anyway, after everybody started to fall asleep, we were sitting on his lower bunk. I was taking notes, and I was kind of falling asleep trying to listen, because he was telling all kinds of stories. And I was nodding off, and I remember he started telling me the story about how the old perfumers of Kanauj, the center of perfume distillation in India, attar making in India, how the old perfumers discovered that the most beautiful combination of two fragrances was, and I perked up, and he said, rose and vetiver. And so I wrote that down. And after that trip, I started experimenting with all kinds of different types of rose and different types of vetiver in different proportions. And of course, it takes a while to make a perfume because it has to meld together. So it was a slow process, but I ended up making a perfume out of that crystal extracted rose bourbonica from that farm of Babulal's under that temple, mixed with wild harvested Rajasthani vetiver. And I called the perfume Savitri to commemorate the entire trip. So that's a little story for you. Now, this is another part of the story, and that is that Ramakant is also a chemist. And his business is based on essential oils and working with distillers, but in very large volumes. And one of the things that he does is that he extracts specific compounds from essential oils and then sells those on the world market. Okay, now keep in mind that the majority of essential oils that are produced do not go to aromatherapy. They go to flavoring and fragrancing. And flavoring and fragrancing companies do not want whole essential oils because they're always different from year to year. You never know exactly what you're getting. But the first exposure that I had to this, and this is a fractionating column. These things here, I don't know if you can see the cursor or not, but these tubes here are fractionating columns, and what they do is they fill it up with an essential oil and they heat it from the outside, and it causes the compounds inside the oil to separate, okay? And then they're taken out. So when we got to this place, we were driving through the countryside. We started to come into this little village, and it smells like, you know, an Indian village. There's people smoking tobacco smoke and incense, and flower vendors, open sewage, and all these, you know, the aromas of India. And then suddenly the whole place starts to smell like ylang ylang. And Ramakant says, so, you know, that's my factory that you're smelling. And so we pull up, and they're fractionating ylang ylang oil to take out the farnesene, all right? And the farnesene is going to, guess what? Ivory soap, okay? So that's what a lot of the essential oils are used for in the industry. And that's what he and his family have been doing. And of course, then they have these other more unique things like the Rosa Bourbonica. So these are kind of on two opposite ends of the spectrum. One is extremely unique artisanal boutique kind of quality with this huge spiritual, mythological, agricultural sustainability type of story with it. And then at the other end, it's just like industrial level essential oil business. So this is a gentleman we met along the way, and this is a typical example. Small farmer. The typical farmer in India has less than an acre, and it's cultivated very intensively with all kinds of things. And there might be betel nut and black pepper vines growing in the trees. It's all like multi-story kind of agriculture, but there's always a flower cash crop. And the big cash crop here for this guy was white ginger lily, okay? And this would make its way into garlands and also into various extracts as well. These type of floral extracts are really extraordinary if you can get really high quality stuff, mostly as absolutes, okay? Solvent extracts. But I have made some perfumes from a base of sustainable sandalwood, okay? That's my contribution now to keeping the tradition of attaras alive, is to use the Santalum alba, which is a traditional South Indian sandalwood, but from sustainable plantation sources as the base for the attar. And then instead of doing the laborious 30-day distillation process with the plants, which is not feasible, to use a very high quality absolute that's been infused into the sandalwood. It's not the same, but it's a sustainable, organic, non-toxic alternative. So along the way, you see a lot of things. I mean, the entire journey, every single day was full of wonders and also terrible things, because India is a very difficult place and Rajasthan is one of the hottest places on earth. This is a Tulsi plant, and the Tulsi plant is a famous herb, aromatic plant that has a place in every Hindu household in India. And it's considered to be the embodiment of a goddess who is protecting the home. And this is the end of the little Rajasthan trip. And I wanted to show you an example of how simple rituals once had a function. And now in modern times, the function has been forgotten and it's become something else. And this was a story that Ramakant told me as we were driving through the desert, and we were seeing these flame trees, I believe is what these are called. and they have these bright orange flowers. And he said these flowers have medicinal purposes. And in the past, what was done was that there was a ceremony every year that happened where the flowers would be gathered together collectively in the village, and they would make a big pot of tea from this. And then they would all ritualistically bathe each other, and it would cleanse the skin. Apparently, it was good for treating infections, microbial, infections on the skin, or skin parasites, or inflammation, or wounds, or whatever. But apparently, it was like a hygienic thing. And they would also wash down the houses with it. So it had a hygienic purpose. And the flowers have some kind of chemical basis for that medicinally. Well, that process became part of Hindu culture. But over the centuries, the original root of the ceremony was forgotten about, and it's no longer done using that particular flower. It's no longer done with that particular intention. Now, what is done in place of that, the origin of that botanical tradition is now called Holi. And this is a festival where Hindus drink bhang lassis, get stoned on cannabis, and then they throw colored dyes on each other. So that's a little story that I learned about how something used to be hygienic and had a purpose, and it was linked to plants, and now it's just turned into this mess. All right, now let's go to Morocco. And this was one of the most recent trips that I took. This was maybe 5 years ago. And I went to Morocco specifically looking for distillers. And I had an interesting discussion with a travel agent before. I met online, I met a couple, and they organized trips. And I said, look, I want to meet distillers. And they'd never heard of a request like that before. And they didn't know anybody. But they put me in touch with a gentleman named Hamid. And he turned out to be just totally cool. And he put together a whole tour, 2 weeks all over Morocco, meeting distillers. And you'll meet him. And so we went all over and saw all kinds of things. And one of the first things that you see is argan. And this is a really good example of how sustainability, ecologically and botanical sustainability, supports society. Because this is the basis of income for thousands and thousands of people in Morocco. And it's interesting because it is, for the most part, work that is done by women in women's collectives. Now, that's the ideal, but it turns out that also there's a political side to this, which is that a lot of the women's co-ops have been co-opted by men who are running them, but that's another story. So this is an argan tree, and I will elaborate on this a little bit more. And it's a thorny tree, and here you can see some of the fruits up there in the top. That's what they look like. And argan, of course, has been used forever there in Morocco. But it was recently discovered by the cosmetic industry and became a really big thing and really stimulated this whole industry in Morocco to grow even more. And these nuts and seeds and fruits, these are the nuts, okay, that are inside those they're inside those pods, those fruits. And they're very tasty, and the goats love them. So you can drive through these, you can drive past these forests of argan trees, and they're full of goats eating the argan. And the argan industry is done primarily by village women. And this is what they do. It's all done by hand. You see, it's all pressed. It's all shelled by hand and then pressed. And so there's all of these collectives everywhere where you can stop in and you can watch this entire process being done. And so this is classical kind of situation, and you can see that they have a grinding mill in the back there. And so it starts by basically just extracting the inside of the seed, extracting the nut from the shell, which is all done by hand. So that's the argon industry, and it is wonderful to actually work with the women's collectives directly. And what we did was, with the help of Hamid, we actually went around and we visited different collectives and talked to people, and we found sources that were the real genuine women's run collectives. And they tended to be sort of really out of the way. Some of the bigger ones were like on the highway with, you know, big signs and tourist attraction kind of thing. But the real collectives that were really helping the women with employment and financial income tended to be more invisible. And so I really wanted to bring them out, and that's the sources that we've worked with, is finding those smaller, genuine producers. Now, this is the springtime in Chemiset, which is a green agricultural area on the way into Fez. And it's full of neroli blossoms. And neroli is a big crop in Morocco. And here they are taking a break because the harvesting of the neroli flower happens at midday. It produces a lot more oil, and it doesn't produce that much oil at all, but the flowers have more oil at midday when it's hot. And so that's when they do the harvesting. And they're taking a lunch break here. And here are some harvesters. And neroli has a mood uplifting kind of effect. It's really hard work. And so here we are, Hamid and I lounging around while the women are working, which is a typical Moroccan scene. Although this gentleman is getting ready to do a distillation. He's working. We're just watching. I'm the visiting American aromatherapist, interested in all the work, but not that interested in doing it. And furthermore, they weren't going to let me do it anyway. So these are the neroli flowers that are being spread out for a little bit of drying preparation before the distillation. And it's a very, very beautiful fragrance, really nice. And of course, it's an extremely expensive oil. And the reason for that is the yield. Yield of each individual species is the primary determining factor of its cost. So it takes a ton, basically, 1,000 pounds or something like that. I mean, a huge amount of flowers to get 1 liter of oil. And that's because there's not a lot of oil in those flowers. And so that's what makes it expensive. So Moroccan neroli, in my opinion, is one of the finest, and it's also one of the most expensive. And because of climate change, a lot of these oils now are under pretty severe stress, limited supplies, prices going up. Now, here's something that I learned in Fez. Which is a type of aromatherapy career. And what this woman is doing is that in the neroli season, she goes to the market in the morning and she buys a whole bunch of blossoms, the blossoms of the Citrus aurantii, the bitter orange. And then she will go to her clients' homes and she will do a distillation in their home. And she'll typically do 3 or 4 distillations in one day in 3 or 4 different homes. And so she has a portable still, and she pulls up with her car full of flowers and her still, and she goes in and she sets this up, and she will do a distillation of neroli in the home. And her clients make an appointment for her to come and distill neroli in their home. It's a beautiful thing, actually. And the reason that Moroccan families do this is because various kinds of hydrosols that are produced at different times of year are used in a variety of different ways in the home. And so this woman will produce several liters of neroli hydrosol, orange blossom water. And that will be used for medicine, part of the pharmacy. And the main thing that the woman of the home told me that she used it for, she said, I drink a little bit and it helps my headaches, okay? But they also use it for the skin, for cosmetic purposes, and they use it in cooking and other things, I'm sure. So this distiller woman would work intensively for several weeks with the neroli, and then some other flower would come and she would do that for other clients who wanted to have, say, rose water or something like that. So I thought that was lovely, a really nice little business. Okay, so this is meeting with some industrial scale distillers. And one of the really big products to come out of Morocco is cedar wood. And here you can see it, mountains of cedar wood waiting to be distilled. And these two gentlemen are the owners of this business. And they only do distillation for large clients of large amounts, because obviously they have quite a lot to distill. And so it's not, the way their business works is somewhat different. They do not distill oils and then have them available to sell. They do custom contract distillation of only large volumes for specific clients, which I was intrigued in, but I was not one of those clients. But we had a wonderful afternoon anyway, looking over all their equipment and stuff like that. And they were hoping that I was going to be one of those clients, but I wasn't. So another thing that is interesting about Morocco, the distillation scene there, is that these women's cooperatives that focus mostly on argan oil frequently also focus on other local herbal products like honey and essential oils and hydrosols and things like that. And so the women's collectives were something that you see everywhere, and they're doing all kinds of things. And so this is like a simple example, something that's a little bit more upscale, kind of for the tourist. But they have essential oils that they are distilling right there on the grounds, small scale distillation, and also hydrosols and argan oil, of course. And then some of the local artists are featured. And then they have a little boutique shop, and they serve tea and things like that. And so here's another one. And this not only supports the women of the collective in terms of retail sales, a lot of these are actually wild harvested herbs from the region, okay? And you can see the bags of these herbal medicines. And so it's keeping the herbal traditions alive. And then, of course, you have the essential oils here. All right. And a lot of these places also have like a little herb garden. Here's a little mugwort, and here's a little geranium. And these are nice to see as just part of society, nice to visit. And one place we went to, they were distilling essential oils and fixing lunch at the same time, and it was delicious. And here's the Rosa damascena that grows in Morocco. And so here's a tour of the Rose Valley of Morocco. We got there during the Rose Festival. Now there's a Rose Valley that's very famous in Bulgaria, where they have a Rose Festival. And there's also a Rose Valley in Morocco, which I didn't know about. But it's one of the things that Hamid discovered when he was putting together a tour. He said, I'm going to take you to the Rose Festival. And so we went, and this is a farm, and there were lots of things growing there. It's, again, this kind of integrated agriculture, olives, pistachios, different kind of nut trees, argan, not argan or wild trees, but they're in the region, but not so much in this particular area. But mostly it's the cultivation of the roses here that was the main crop. And again, the women are doing the work, but the men are also working in the distillery. You'll see here in a minute, and it's difficult work. You have to be very careful because the roses have thorns. They wear gloves, but it also gets pretty hot. But they also do the picking first thing in the morning. And the gentleman on the right, he's the man who started this whole project. And his name is on the tip of my tongue, and I will remember it, I'm sure, after the class is over. Maybe it'll come sooner. But anyway, he gave us a nice tour of the place and all over the region. It was one of the most beautiful parts of Morocco, actually. And we see in this particular region, this very interesting kind of ecological, these ecosystems that were actually created, because this is a river valley and it was settled about 500 years ago. And when the river valley was settled, what they did was they deliberately created these kind of ecosystems using canals to carry water throughout the whole valley. And it became a extremely rich, verdant place of great biodiversity with olive trees and roses. And the reason that the rose industry grew so much here is that they used the roses as hedges for the borders of the properties. And it became a whole way of life, actually, harvesting the roses in the spring, excuse me, and then distilling them. And it became so big that it turned into the Rose Festival, and celebrities and politicians and everybody descends on this valley every year for the Rose Festival. But the thing that is most remarkable about this is that in this particular region, walking around through these properties that were deliberately created this way ecologically, there is three things that you notice that are just unmistakable. One is that everything smells delicious, and a lot of it is because of the roses, but the fragrance is just beautiful. And the second thing you notice is that there's an abundance of bird songs. And the third thing you notice is that there is both the fragrance and the sound of running water going through these little canals everywhere. It's like a kind of paradise, actually. So I was really quite struck by what can be done with sustainable agriculture. And this is a very old system that was put in place, and it's still there. It's still the way that people live. So the roses are harvested. Everybody brings to a central place their roses from their property, and they get weighed out and they get paid for it. And then they go into these big stills. And this is what the guys are doing. The guys are carrying these big bags, loading and unloading the trucks and taking them to these central collecting areas where they're weighed. And then they're purchased by the distiller, and they go into these gigantic stills, and it's all modernized now, of course. All right, so we're on track, and now the next section here, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. This is, now we're going to meet the Palo Santo in Ecuador. And this is a real story because I was actually the one who introduced the Palo Santo to the North American essential oil market quite a while back. There was some around, but it wasn't being distilled in any significant way, and it wasn't being distributed in any significant way. So here we are at the fishing village of Puerto Lopez, which is almost directly on the equator. And this happened through this incredible synchronicity, which is one of the things that Palo Santo creates. It has a reputation for making magical things happen. And so I actually ended up in this village because of synchronicity around this whole plant, which is a whole story. And actually, I wrote a book about the travels to Morocco called Travels with Hamid. And then I wrote a book about the Palo Santo adventure called Sacred Smoke. And this is how I met the gentleman who is the world's expert in Palo Santo tree cultivation, ethnobotany, and distillation. And he has a little store right there on a little storefront there on the beach, on the Malecon, okay, the main road right in front of the ocean there. And he has his whole story there. Okay, he's got a little picture of his original still, and he's got some pictures of the Palo Santo tree. And then he says, I believe planting a tree saves my life. And so he's one of the main reforestation experts on Palo Santo. And then always think something good is going to happen. And then, do you want a massage? So this was his little store where he sold Palo Santo products, and that's where I first met him. And there he is, Dante Bolcato, a retired Italian psychotherapist who came to Ecuador in his early 50s after retiring from a very stressful practice, very unhealthy, chain smoker, very stressed out, depressed, divorced, basically just total burnout after years of being a psychotherapist, and landed in this little fishing village, and he met the Palo Santo, and he had a mystical spiritual experience when he met the tree. And the connection was he discovered his life purpose, which was he was going to work to preserve this tree. And the way that he did it was through replanting efforts and also through ethnobotanical education. And he became one of the world's experts, if not the expert at this point, of the mythology and the botany and the distillation and so forth of the Palo Santo. And this is one of the old trees that he took me to in the forest. And the Palo Santo tree is very interesting because the region is tropical dry forest, okay? So it's tropical, but it's dry, which means it's really hot 9 months out of the year. And then 3 months out of the year, it cools down a little bit and it rains. And the Palo Santo is a relative of frankincense botanically, and it can go for decades without water, years and years without water. And then a little bit of rain, it will suddenly go through its whole flowering and fruiting and seeding stage. So it's very similar to other desert trees, specifically frankincense. And the way that oil is produced is quite unique because in the tree, there is no oil in a living tree. And this is a great mystery. There's some resinous oily material in the roots, but, and here's the fruits that happen like right after a rain, okay? So that's what the tree looks like, a whole bunch of pictures there. Here's the tropical dry forest. It's cactus and it's dry. It's actually a unique, very rich area botanically, biodiversity. But here's the thing that's intriguing, is that the tree must grow to its full life. It must die a natural death. And then it has to fall over, and then it has to lie on the ground for a number of years. And then it will start to produce oil. Okay, so something is going on. You can't just cut down the tree and then have it produce oil. There are some attempts to stimulate this process. Some people are apparently plundering the tree and drying it or doing something to it to get oil out of it. But Dante is not doing that. He is working with the government and with local harvesters, and they only harvest the dead wood that has been on the ground for a period of time that has produced the oil. So the way he described it was that this oil is a gift of life given by the tree's death. All right. So it's an interesting thing because Palo Santo, the sacred wood, is in this cultural context of, the religion there is Catholic, primarily, mixed with some of the shamanism. And the primary motif is the death and rebirth of Jesus. And so here we have a tree that has the death and rebirth picture mythology that goes with it, which is very much the shamanic and also the feminine side of it. So it's an intriguing kind of cultural juxtaposition of mythologies, you could say. And so this was a table that he made showing different kinds of oil concentration in some of the different pieces of wood. So this is a little walk that he took me on, and this is a forest, the Machalilla National Park, which is the home of the Palo Santo tree, the heart of Palo Santo country. And this is where Floricopia had the opportunity to support him in his reforestation efforts. And we supported his planting of thousands and thousands of Palo Santo trees. And this is also a beautiful whale watching area as well. So this is the forest, actually. If you're looking west, this is what you see. If you're looking east, this is the forest where thousands of sapling Palo Santo trees were planted. From the money that came from the sale of the oil in the US, we took a percentage of that and sent it back to them. And we did that for years and years. So here we took a little tour. And of course, I was very naive. You don't actually want to be walking around with a camera like that in Ecuador. And so here's Dante taking us on a walk through the forest, seeing more Palo Santo. And here we are back at his distillery. And I met him first. I made 2 trips there. And the first time I met him, he had just started doing the distillation. I brought back one of the first liters of oil that he produced. And then the second time I went back, many years later, he had a full-scale operation and he was selling to a number of clients, 3 major customers, with me being one of them, in the US, and then 2 others in 2 different parts of the world. And so this was his distillery. He had 2 of these stills like this. And of course, it's blazing hot and really humid. But this is where the wood would come in from the forest. And his network of gathering harvesters would bring in this dead wood. And it was extremely aromatic, of course. And so this gentleman was the man who ground up the wood, and that's what he did all day long. You can see that. And here he's showing us some of the powder, and then the powder would be distilled. And so here's Dante showing us how steam distillation is going to be done. And then this is his assistant, who, and I'm sorry, I haven't told this story for a while and I'm forgetting all their names. I believe this is Mariana. She was actually the chief distiller for him and had been doing it for quite a long time, and she was really, really good. So this is the separator that they're looking at. And here is the oil in the separator. And here's Dante pouring some of the oil and hydrosol off. And here is Mariana, I believe, separating it out. And so here's what it looks like. And very interesting. It is well known that if you distill Palo Santo on the full moon, you actually get more oil than if you distill the same wood on the new moon. One of the mysteries. Why is that? Nobody really knows. But then here, the Palo Santo is also an industry for the local people. He employed 20 people at that time, probably a lot more now. And this was very safe because a lot of the women who were working here, they had no other source of income. A lot of them had, rather unpleasant conditions in the marriages and homes and so forth. And so he was really helping the local people a lot. And they would make the cones of the Palo Santo wood that were widely burned all over Ecuador, actually, to keep the mosquitoes away. So they would make the leftover powder into a paste, and then they would make them into these cones. And his other chief assistant and his daughter were making other kinds of handicrafts from it, candles in this case. And so here's Dante's little greenhouse where he perfected the whole process of cultivation, germination of the Palo Santo seed. It's a really complicated story, and we're almost out of time, but I wanted to just show you this. And this is the Palo Santo wood, and he did a nice ceremonial offering when I was there, and started a little fire. And he does a little fire puja every morning, a little meditation, where he creates this big cloud of smoke. And so the whole area around his house, all of this cloud of smoke goes all over the village. And so he's blessing everybody every morning. He's like a shaman now. And here I am getting a little bit of it. So that's the Palo Santo story. Now I'm going to tell you very briefly about the distillers in Corsica. And we'll just start on the mainland. And there's a lot of distillers. They're like tourist attractions. And you can get these guidebooks to find all the distillers and their farms. And so here's one of the things that you see very commonly when you go to a distillery, how it works. And here's a gentleman, and this is in Provence, not Provence itself actually, but on the way to Provence, just nearby. This is a Guillaume, and he produces on a large scale a lot of the common French oils, lavender and many things. They distill on a seasonal basis where something comes in the spring and then something comes in the late spring and something comes in the early summer, like that. They're always distilling something according to the seasonal basis. And this is the type of still that these distillers use very frequently. This is a top loading. They put it in, and then you can see here that the still actually goes up through the roof. All right, and so it's loaded by crane through the roof, and then the condenser and the collecting equipment is down underneath this. Okay, so that's how a lot of these stills work. Then of course there's the boutique where they have the herbs and the aromatic goodies and the teas and things like that. And every distillery typically has a small boutique like this. And now we're in Corsica, and I went there specifically looking for the Helichrysum, and I became somewhat of an expert in Corsican Helichrysum. And this is the countryside, little villages like this. And distillers, there's 8 major distillers on the island of Corsica. And these two brothers have have an operation, and I went and visited them and just see what they have. This is distillation of eucalyptus at another distillery, not the same place. And then this is the place on the south of the island that produces the most extraordinary oil, in my opinion. And the family that I had the most personal contact with and spent the most time with. And so here we are. And this is, gentleman on the left is the distiller. He's one of the distillers that are on the team. And this is, he's introducing me to cistus. And so you can see he has sort of unique ears, a sort of a elfin background. And so this is a small scale distillery here. And cistus flowers and cistus leaves. The leaves are distilled. They have the thicker oil in them. The flowers don't really give too much fragrance. And they're beautiful to look at anyway, rock rose. And so Corsica is a botanical wonderland of all kinds of species. A lot of oils are produced there. Species of pine up in the mountain are brought down. And junipers are distilled, and cypress. And there's one unique type of juniper, which is a dwarf juniper that is distilled there. It grows very low because of the climate, or because of the altitude. And here's another distiller, and this is Pierre Alessandri, and he inherited a citrus farm from his father. And Corsica used to be a big producer of citruses. And on this farm, you cannot drive any equipment because it's all built with terraces that are only wide enough to walk on. And so it goes back at least 200 or 300 years, several generations. And he inherited this. And he found that he couldn't make a living with citruses, the fruit on the market. And so he turned it into a citrus distillation operation instead. And he makes true neroli, which is the flower and the leaf and the tiny green buds. And that's called Petitgrain. Okay, and that's a true Petitgrain distillation. Most Petitgrain is just the trash from trimming the trees, but the true Petitgrain are the tiny green buds, the tiny green fruits, I'm sorry, the tiny green fruits, the flowers, and the leaves together. This is his farm manager, and he has a large industrial still, like they all do, and does things on a pretty large scale. And this is the separator, okay? And this is actually rosemary oil in the separator. But Pierre was doing some unique distillations. This is an herb called bupleurum. And bupleurum is a famous Chinese medicine, and he was distilling it. And so I introduced it as a medicine for aromatherapy to be used along with black pepper and eucalyptus. And when I asked Pierre, what is bupleurum good for? He said it stops the cravings for nicotine. And well, that was enough for me. And so I actually did a little study and offered it to people, and it was confirmed. Yes, it actually does that in aromatherapy. Unfortunately, this was a boutique artisanal product that's no longer available. So here's the bupleurum and where the region it came from. And this was also part of that plant and what he was distilling. And here's another one you may or may not have heard of. This is called lentisque or lentisco. It is the leaves of the pistachio tree, not the pistachio that you eat, but a different species. This has unique properties for lymphatic drainage. And so these are a few species that are unique to Corsica. that's same thing. And another one that's unique to Corsica is the Criste marine. Okay, this is a succulent actually that grows on the cliffs. And this is also used specifically for lymphatic purposes. So Corsican plants and Corsican aromatherapy has some unique offerings. And so that's the Criste marine also. And then there was the spike lavender. This is a different type of lavender. It's not the cooling type. It's too high in camphor to use. And then a couple other things like hyssop and myrtle, rosemary, wild carrot seed is also distilled. But the reason I went there was because of the helichrysum. And so now in the last few minutes, I'll just quickly go through the helichrysum story here. Helichrysum is really very, very special, very special. And this was one of the main distillers that we ended up working with, Steffi here, and her distillery there, which had been set up by a German gentleman who had basically started the distillation of helichrysum, working with the company L'Occitane. And this is the helichrysum flower in various stages, the budding stage, opening up, and the flowering stage. And here we are back to Michel, okay? And so you met Michel earlier, the distiller of the helichrysum, and here he's out on a harvesting trip. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a 3-minute video about the helichrysum distillation, and then we will be done. And let me see if I can pull this up and do this. And hopefully this will play okay and everything will be all right. Let me see, it looks like it'll work. All right, so here we go. And I'm going to turn the volume up, so hopefully it's going to come through clear. But here's about helichrysum.
The beautiful flowers of helichrysum give one of the world's most healing essential oils. Helichrysum grows in many places in the Mediterranean region, but the variety from the island of Corsica is renowned for its unique properties as the result of the soil and climate. The harvest season is about a month long, from mid-June until mid-July. Harvesting begins at sea level, where the flowers begin to bloom first. The name helichrysum comes from the Greek words helios, meaning sun, and chrysum, meaning gold. It is also called immortelle, because the dry flowers last all winter. Harvesting is hard work.
So you just need a hat, your knife,
gloves,
the plastic, and the flowers.
the flowers,
You must have the flowers and the muscle and the back.
The plants at higher altitudes ripen later in the season. Helichrysum has a long history of use as an herbal medicine. The essential oil, however, has emerged only in the last 20 years on the world market. It is now one of the most famous oils for skincare and wound healing. Until about 10 years ago, all the oil came from wild flowers. Now, there are many new plantations coming on the island. It's very similar to the history of lavender 100 years ago, when the wild populations began to decline from overharvesting and increased demand to be replaced with widespread cultivation. Climate change is causing reduced harvests. Sometimes spring comes late with more rain, which means less flowers, or summer comes early with rapid onset of strong heat, which means that the flowers dry quickly before they can be harvested. When the heat of summer begins, the flowers give off a sweet and pungent aroma that perfumes the island.
How would you describe the fragrance? Because people cannot smell. How would you tell them it smells?
It's a spicy perfume.
Spicy perfume.
Helichrysum is a relatively expensive essential oil. One of the main reasons for this is because there is a very low yield of the oil from the flowers. 1 ton of flowers are required to get 1 kilo of oil.
Not yet a lot. You can see maybe it's very dark. It's even really brown. But this is the particles they are very more heavy of the oil.
Helichrysum essential oil works by supporting skin cell regeneration and promoting blood flow, especially in the capillaries under the skin. It is excellent for a wide range of skin conditions and soft tissue injuries.
There is three kinds of immortal culture: wild from the valley, and wild from the mountain. The mountain is better for the skin, for the face. Sea and valley is better for the pains, and the culture is better for the bruise.
In addition to its healing powers for the body, Helichrysum is regarded by some distillers as having special spiritual properties that are also healing to the mind and emotions.
This plant work with your subconscious, and makes you realize what you are, the real person you are.
Okay, well, that is our little presentation. I hope you enjoyed those journeys and learned something about the distillers and some of the sustainability issues. And of course, there's a lot more to talk about. And in a certain way, we're just getting started here. But that is the conclusion of my little travelogue presentation. So I will just open it up. It's time to wrap things up. It is our last week, our last presentation, unfortunately, sadly, but let me just open it up. And Jeffrey, if you want to tell people how they can raise their hands again, or if you have anything that you would like to comment on. Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you. It has been wonderful. I enjoyed myself. What else? Anybody else? Anybody want to say anything?
You can type questions into the chat, or you can raise your hand on the participants panel.
Okay, a real gift during these difficult times. So thank you. All right, so one raised hand. Go ahead. Janine, are you there?
Yeah, it was wonderful seeing the distillers, the areas, because it gives us a broader spectrum as to the environment and therefore how that oil is going to affect us. So thank you. It was fabulous.
Yes, you're most welcome. And thank you for being interested also. And it's really, it's true what you're saying, that the more we understand about the oil, the more we really appreciate it. And the more we understand why it does what it does. And that's why, if we go all the way back to the beginning, we're talking about the moon and the sun and the qualities and the ecosystems that the plant comes from, and the prana and the chi and everything that we talked about. I hope that it has given you a truly holistic view now of the inner dimensions of the plants. Okay. And I'm sure that you have a lot of reading material left. I don't know, maybe everybody's read all of the files, but if you haven't, you can always revisit that. And a couple other things coming in. You are most welcome for our efforts to support the Women's Collective and finding ethical suppliers. And fascinating evening, wonderful 5 weeks. Thank you. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed myself. Yes, so much hard work goes into essential oils and botanicals, much to appreciate. That's true. And unless you have actually done the work, it's hard to know why true essential oils are really valuable. So especially with a plant like Helichrysum that doesn't produce very much oil, or roses or something like that. I mean, you can work for days and days and days and days and do all the distillation and have this much oil, okay? And that's the way it is for true artisanal products like that. And it's really good to appreciate it. In general, in our culture, we don't know the value of things, right? Because a lot of times we don't have any connection to growing it or producing it or transporting it or preparing it or anything. It's something that is a very good lesson for people to learn when they do the hands-on work. All right. Colleen, again, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everybody. Thank you, Jeffrey. And so until we meet again at some point, take good care and enjoy the essential oils. And hopefully now you have a new way of perceiving them and thinking about them. So good night.